Welcome to the TeamHarrow Podcast. This week's guest is Adam Silva. Adam and I dive into his incredible journey from playing lacrosse at West Point to leading and shaping the Wounded Warrior Project before veteran nonprofits were even on the map. We discuss leadership, overcoming personal challenges, and what it takes to truly make a difference. Tune in for part 1 of this inspiring conversation. 3, 2, 1, launch. All right. Adam.
Great to see you again, Benny.
You too, man.
Thanks
It's been a while since we've seen each other.
Yeah.
We go back, I guess, when I first got injured. And both of us coming from the Army lacrosse community after I got injured. I don't know if it was you reached out to Gina or somehow we got connected. And I remember thinking, someone told me, hey, there's this guy, Adam Silva, who's a 93 grad, played lacrosse, and he's at Wounded Warrior Project. He's trying to connect with you. And I was like, who the fuck is Adam Silva?
You're not the first or last person to say that. Yeah, you remember Bob Russell.
That's right. His son was a goalie at Navy,
Matt,
right?
yeah.
Matty, yeah.
And Matt was connected to the Couch Brothers.
Yep.
Who I think it was Jake was in theater with you at the time, right?
Chris. Yeah.
So I get a phone call from Bob Russell. Bob and I were on the U.S. lacrosse board together.
Mm-hmm.
He calls me and he says, hey, Benny Harrow just got banged up. And I was like, okay. And it's kind of the same thing. I'm like, you mean Benny from Army lacrosse? He's like, yeah, it looks like it was pretty severe. And I was like, okay. I was like, what details do we have? He told me about Chris being with you. And I was like, all right, let me kind of get our team ready.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll never forget getting to Gina was like getting to the president, because Chris's wife was like the conduit.
That's right. Michelle was there when I first got there.
Yeah, and they were and rightly so.
Yeah.
You didn't know me, I didn't know you, and I didn't really know the Couches, but they were very guarded about letting anyone inside.
Yeah.
And rightly so, as I said, because Gina, obviously her world was changing quite a bit.
Yeah.
And then that was the beginning of our relationship.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So interesting enough, so Chris and I had shadowed each other our entire military career, where we both played lacrosse at Army. We went through IOBC together, Ranger School the same time, or maybe he graduated a class before me. I got to Fort Hood. He was a platoon leader in the same company as me. We both went to Iraq together. We both put our packets in to go to SFAS same time. We end up going to selection together. We end up going through the Q course together. And in fact, actually, he started the Q course earlier, like a month earlier than me. And for whatever reason, we ended up being graduating the same time. And then he goes to 3rd group. I go to 7th group. And I'm like, all right, well, this was cool. I guess this is where we part ways.
Yeah.
My first deployment to Afghanistan in 2010, my AOB, my company, gets split off and attached to his battalion. And then he was the battle captain at the time. So every time my ODA got into a TIC, a troops in contact, and I needed air support or just to talk to anybody, he would be on the radio.
Yeah.
And it got to a point where that summer it was so kinetic and we were dropping so many bombs that I would come up on the net and he would know exactly what was going on, and we just already had our little rhythm and flow going, and he would push all the assets to us, and it was pretty cool. And then I think actually the day 15 May, the day I got injured, Chris's vehicle hit an IED also. And so he technically got hit by an IED the same day I did.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been interesting. Well, I'm gonna see him timeline when this comes out, but I'm gonna see him this weekend up in Boston at the PLL. I think it's their first weekend of playoffs.
Yeah.
So the Green Beret Foundation is playing the Navy SEAL Foundation in a lacrosse game.
Yep.
So he's gonna be up there for that, and we'll be on the sidelines again.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, it was interesting running into you. Obviously when I first got injured at the hospital, the only other classmate of yours that I knew was Steve Heller.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I remember Steve Heller from the prep school.
Yeah.
Because here I am at my post-grad school, out of high school, before West Point in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. Me and 8 or 9 other lacrosse recruits and a couple of regular enlisted kids that are trying to play lacrosse for the first time at prep school.
Yeah.
And then there's this 40-year-old guy that keeps coming and playing pickup with us. And he's like really serious about it. And I just remember that, like, who's this old man that keeps coming and like playing like attack with me, like with us? Like, who is this guy?
Yeah, that's Steve. Yeah, he ended up moving back to North Jersey after he got out of the Army, and he stayed. Coach Hansen, of course, you know Coach Hansen, and the legend, Tom Hansen, and he was with Tom for, I want to say 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, as
kind of a volunteer assistant coach, but yeah, he just went because he wanted to play. He didn't care about coaching.
Yeah,
so,
but yeah, after I first got injured and trying to piece things together, it was a huge having you kind of at Wounded Warrior Project, and I'll let you tell what you did there, but having you there as really another member of the family, because I feel like, and you can put your 2 cents into this as well, I think that the Army lacrosse team is very close, and probably one of the closest lacrosse teams I know of, like collegiately, and talking to other kids that you meet other people after you leave school, and maybe they played at Princeton or maybe they played at Duke, but it's just not the same. And it was great, and it was a fraternity for them too, but for us, obviously, because of where you volunteer to go to school, what that means, what the institution means, the understanding that you're probably going to be going to war, and especially during my time frame, it was a definite that you were going to war, right?
Yeah.
And that Army lacrosse family is pretty special.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, and having been involved now with college sports for the last 15 years or so, I take nothing away from kids who don't go to an academy. But I think it goes all the way back to, Beast Barracks, when you're trying to break away for, mass athletics, just that 45 minutes to an hour where you can just see your teammates, and maybe put the pads on or maybe not. But it's that shared misery, know, that we share initially. And then, I know this from having witnessed it both as a player and as a coach. There's no other place on earth that demands more of college athletes. And to be able to, and then you take and add in the West Point element, where our preseason in January, the snot's, freezing on your face mask, and you can't feel your toes. And I remember one day we're going out to practice, and we're in the middle of a blizzard, and I'm thinking, I'm a plebe, and I'm thinking, man, thank God we needed a rest day. And I'm thinking, we'll maybe watch film, stretch, lift, do something inside Truxton. And coach is like, all right, fellas, let's go. And, he comes out and he's got like a full-length park on and his hat and his mittens and his boots and all. And I kid you not, we run out into Mikey Stadium. We go through the tunnel. There is a snowplow on the field.
Yeah.
and we have orange balls. And I'm thinking, man, this place is just, this place hits different.
So you're a 93 grad. I'm a 2005 grad. But I had the same exact experience where we would go down, we practice at Mikey too, but we'd also sometimes go down to Shea right by the river, which was miserable. And I remember my sophomore year, how cold it was. You would wear we had that like Under Armour leggings, tops and bottoms, and some people would double up on that. And then you would wear sweats, and then we would all wear surgical gloves to keep our hands warm.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's one of those things where you think you know cold, but you don't really know cold until you take your mouthpiece out for a second to get a sip of water, and then you put it back in, and it crunches, and you're like, I can't believe we're playing at this, right? Or when they order 100 neon yellow balls, and you're like, oh, what is this for? And they're like, oh, it's for when it snows. You're like, what?
Yeah. Well, and it's like one of the few times as an athlete where you don't want to stop running.
Yeah.
Because it's like as soon as you stop, everything would freeze and then just cold. So
and it's one of those things too where I'm like, at the time you're like, what am I getting out of this? This is stupid, right? But looking back at it, you're like, all right, well, there's some character development, and this suck, and that's what it was really about is being able to deal with this suck.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so how did you get after you graduated from school playing lacrosse? Where did you end up?
So graduated in '93, which ironically was right at post Desert Storm, and so ended up going to airborne school in the summer of '93. people ask, oh, jumping out of planes. I'm like, yeah, well, you could also, if you go to airborne school, you get to maximize leave, before you hit OBC. So went to airborne school in Georgia, and then ended up at Fort Sill for they now call it Bullet, but officer basic course. And again, why did I go field artillery? Well, like every athlete in my class was going field artillery. So we spent 6 months together in Oklahoma, and then was at the 1st Infantry Division. And so I ended up at a very unique time where the Army was downsizing. And so we got this memorandum from Department of the Army that said, hey, if you want to get out of active duty, you take the balance of your commitment and you double it, and you serve that in the Guard and or Reserve. And so I ended up doing 2 years active at Fort Riley, and then getting out. My wife and I were both at Fort Riley together, and then we ended up moving out to California, joining the 40th Infantry Division of the California National Guard. So yeah, and it was funny because we're going out there, and I'm looking for a unit, and they're like, well, what are you? I was like, well, I'm a first lieutenant, and I was close to being a captain, and they're like, well, what's your branch? I said, field artillery, and I don't think the 40th ID had any field artillery assets. And I was like, okay, well, what do I do? They said, well, we have a quartermaster, transportation, food, fuel, and water. I was like, okay, I guess I can do that. And so that's what I ended up doing in the 40th ID.
Yeah.
And then when we moved to Florida, it was the same thing. So back then, nobody was getting out of the reserves or the Guard. There was no spots. So I ended up moving to Florida, and I had nowhere to go. And so they put me on the IRR. And then I sat there for about 5 or 6 years, and then I was out. So I jokingly say what a difference a decade makes.
Sure.
Because if you're 93 versus 03, what your kind of generation experienced, the guys that were there in 01 and then, John Fernandez, class of 03, I think, or no, 01. He was our team captain in 01. And he was my introduction to Wounded Warrior Project, was when John got banged up. But again,
I stayed with Johnny on my recruit trip.
Did you really?
When I was in high school at Woodbury.
Yeah.
It was John I stayed with as a lacrosse recruit.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
He was one of the very first guys that was helped by WWP.
Okay.
And most people don't know. Those who know John don't necessarily know this, but. So he was part of the invasion into Iraq. He was hit by friendly fire.
Yeah.
It was a 500-pound Air Force bomb that hit his position. And he lost a couple of his guys, but was lucky enough to survive. And then he ended up going back to graduation, and I think standing, on his prosthetics for one of the first times. And, of course, when John got banged up, it was so early in the conflict, and it had been so long since the Army Lacrosse, Brotherhood had experienced that kind of either injuries, wounds, or KIA, that it kind of spread like wildfire through the community, and we all kind of started to pay attention to John. And then when I finally met John face to face, you'll appreciate this because I know you've done this, but I met John face to face in 2005 at the Naval Academy.
Okay.
For an alumni game.
Okay.
And John played in the game.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I think I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was on Rip Miller Field on a Friday night. And I remember John, and I kind of knew who he was when he walked up to the field.
I think it was before our Army-Navy game on Saturday.
Yes.
Because I remember we were like, holy shit, Johnny's playing lacrosse.
Yeah.
And he's running around.
He comes in, takes his sweatpants off, and I saw his prosthetics for the first time. He's a double below the knee guy. And then he's opens up his duffel bag and switches out his prosthetics that had the cleats on them. And of course, in the middle of the game, one of the Navy guys knocked the shit out of him. So
I remember that.
We teased
but he scored. I remember he was playing like a crease attackman, basically. Yeah. That was cool. The Wounded Warrior, and it's funny. People always ask sometimes, well, what did they do for you, or what do you think about them? And I have two instances where I really remember the Wounded Warrior Project being in the hospital, good and bad. And mostly good, really not bad, just kind of more of come on guys, because I remember they brought remember Megan? Mm-hmm. She was great. She was, I guess, my care coordinator, the one at the hospital. I loved her. And bringing the book bag with the workout stuff, I'm like, all right, cool. And then socks, and I was like, I don't know what to do with these. I was like, I can make mittens. But the two things I really remember that stand out was, number one, I got injured in May, so it's fall time frame. I'm starting to really start rehab, and I'm outpatient. Peyton was back up on Long Island with Gina's parents while she was there helping me like figure out what's next, right? And transitioning from inpatient to outpatient. So Peyton was about a year old. Gina had to be around really as my caregiver to take me to appointments and everything. And part of the process was trying to get Peyton back, right? So that way we could be a family again and start that process. And I remember I was still in my motorized Dr. Evil wheelchair because this arm was all banged up. So it was like locked up like that for a couple months. And Megan, I remember running into Megan in the halls. I'm like, hey, Megan, I need some help. She's like, sure, what can I help with? And I was like, we're trying to get Peyton back. There's no daycare here. We tried. It's all filled. Can you guys help find, we'll find a daycare. Maybe there's the one off post that works with the military, and then you guys like help out with that. Is there some way to help coordinate that? And at first she was like, yeah, we don't really do that. And I was like, no, I get that, but like I'm asking, like, this is what I need. Like, I need help, right? And she was like, and we went back and forth, and like finally she's like, all right, I understand, like you need this. And I was like, yes. And she's like, all right, I'll make this happen. And sure shit, she made it happen. And that was great. And then the other big thing I remember that I can honestly say, like, put a stamp on it, like, this is something that they helped me out with was you remember I was playing sled hockey, and then I had the opportunity to go and try out with the Italian national team, and I made it. And then I had the opportunity to go back a couple times and play in tournaments and play with the team. And I reached out to you to help pay to get me over there. And I remember you on the email, you said, make sure you get your frequent flyer. Make sure you get a frequent flyer number because I know you'll be going back. Like, this is your thing. And I was like, and it's one of those like little things that you probably don't even remember that it actually was like impactful, because I'm like, yeah, I will. Like I found a sport that I feel like I can compete again. It makes me feel like an athlete again, like, which is huge mentally in the healing process. And that kind of like, I got you, like whatever you need, we'll send you. I was like, thank you.
I remember that. I don't specifically remember the frequent flyer comment, but I remember, Team Italy and the sled hockey. And, it's really cool. Again, that's 2015, I think, 2016.
Yeah, it was around that time.
And a lot of those things happened, kind of behind the scenes that, we took a lot of criticism from a lot of different places for a lot of different reasons. But, then, we get these unbelievable responses from our surveys to the people we were serving about how great they thought we were. But look, when you're serving over 100,000 people, you're bound to piss a few people off.
Sure.
And it's funny you mentioned the socks. We got the same response from a few folks. Like, and the spouses would like be the ones that were, my husband lost his legs, and you're giving him socks. And we're like, just take it.
Exactly. And we weren't even pissed off. It was just one of those funny things,
right? Yeah. It's like, what do I do with these? But no, we used to have this process, believe it or not, at WWP, where anybody on the team, no matter what their title was or how long they had been with the company, could spend up to $5,000 in support of a warrior, a spouse, or a caregiver without approval. And it's like, I don't know whether Megan was dealing with that at the time, but we did a lot of those kinds of things behind the scenes, and part of that was we were so successful being able to raise money to be able to make decisions like that, in addition to fueling the programs that we had created. And so there were a lot of those things behind the scenes that were going on all over the country. And again, we didn't really wave the flag on them, but I take great pride in the fact that, and it was our teammates, some of the stuff that our teammates were asked to do and were involved in were just unbelievably emotional, and I thought we had assembled a really phenomenal group of people. So, and
it's at an interesting time too, because nobody really, Wounded Warrior Project, when was that established? 02, 03? 03? Yeah. The GWOT kicks off fall of 01. It's like a whole new world. This whole military veteran nonprofit world which I'm very familiar with now, obviously just being injured, but also my wife is the executive director of Yellow Ribbon, which is a whole nother story of how we feel like we're able to pay it back. Learn a lot of lessons that we learned of going through the process, what works, what doesn't. I sit on the board, so like I feel like I can actually help steer the ship in some way with that. But you guys were really, I hate to use the word, but like the trendsetter, like leading the pack, right? Of what does that look like? Because from the Yellow Ribbon Fund, same deal, where it was a bunch of Vietnam veterans up in the DC area that came back and didn't have the reception, and there were no parades, they got spit on, and they didn't want that for guys like myself, so they stepped up and wrote a check and did whatever they could. There was no veteran nonprofit back then, right? That whole idea.
Yeah. Well, and so our original founder was in a helicopter accident in training off the coast of Somalia, lost a bunch of Marines in that accident, and came back, and it was kind of, that was the situation. It wasn't the Vietnam situation, but it was like, there was, we do a great job training people and preparing people to go to war and, eliminate the enemy. What we don't do a great job of is taking care of when they get back. And that's changed over the last 20 years in a lot of ways. But back then, there wasn't, and you're always kind of, you're straddling the line of, hey, I help wounded guys. Hey, you're about to go to war. Like, I'm the last guy you want to talk to, right? It's like, hey, sign your SGLI or your T-Segley. It's like, I don't want to, I'm going to war, you know? And so we always, you don't get a lot of interest or support from the active community. And then you're kind of at odds with the DOD because, oh, by the way, we're struggling with recruitment. And then you see our commercials on television, you know, and but back then we were just kind of like, hey, we've got to do something, and it started with the backpack, and then the soldier ride kicked off. It was a cross-country bike ride, and then before you know it, we had partnered. And I think even from early on, one of the things that separated WWP from others is that we never really compared ourselves to other veterans service organizations. We would compare ourselves to Apple or Coca-Cola or Microsoft, right? Like, we weren't trying to run a great nonprofit, we were trying to run a business. And because of that, we caught a lot of criticism, because we invested in marketing, we invested in fundraising, we invested in development, all so that we could then have almost an endless supply of money to support the programs and services that were changing and saving lives. And that doesn't sit well with some people, so
it's unfortunate, because as an injured veteran, that sits well with me, because I know that there's an organization that will make sure that the country doesn't forget about me. Right. And it seems like it was, I don't want to say it, but like a smear campaign kind of, where it was like how you're saying, like, you ran it like a business, but there was a reason for that. Right.
Well, and anytime as a nonprofit, if you make that decision, you're going to attract critics. Just the way it is. And if you look back, there's several instances of other, historically phenomenal nonprofits who have gone through, they refer to it now at WWP as the landmark event. And unfortunately, it changes the way you end up having to do business, and not necessarily for the better, but you just have to make changes. And I'm proud of the fact that my wife is the chief program officer there. My wife Jen's class of '93. She's a volleyball player. Neither one of us are combat vets, but she's been at WWP now since 2008. They're still serving tens of thousands of people. They've got their programs, and they've stabilized everything from fundraising to program delivery and operations. So they're in a really good spot.
I'm still on the mailing list. I get the stickers.
It's interesting too, because several of the things we were criticized for actually laid the foundation that allowed WWP to survive through the landmark event, and then also stabilize and grow. And so they've gone through a couple different leadership changes, and now have a new CEO just because the last one retired. But there's this foundation that was laid probably 17, 18 years ago that has really allowed the organization to not only survive but flourish. And the other thing, this is another one that kind of goes without a lot of people noticing it, but WWP gives a ton of money to other veterans nonprofits. in some cases, if they didn't, those other veterans nonprofits wouldn't be able to survive.
Yeah.
You know, because again, when you make a commitment to fundraising and marketing and building a brand, you know, that gives you that foundation that's able to then fuel others.
Sure.
And so the ripple effect is fantastic. And they have some of the greatest partners or strategic partners on the face of the planet.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, I know you guys had that huge partnership with Under Armour, because I remember we did a lacrosse event at the headquarters in Baltimore.
Yeah.
Josh Sims was there. I think he was maybe at Under Armour at the time, and it was a really great network that you guys had there to support guys like myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, Josh Sims just inducted into the PLL Hall of Fame.
I saw that.
Yeah.
I saw that.
Yeah.
I remember when I met him, I was like, "Hey, dude." He's like, "Hey, pleasure to meet you. You know, it's an honor." I'm like, "Yeah, you were my counselor at I think it was Duke lacrosse camp back in like '95, something like that."
Yeah, he's an impressive guy. I remember that day too. We had some. I want to say Eric Mineo was there.
Eric Mineo was there.
We did We
did like a workout outside, right?
Yeah, right on the water there, Baltimore Harbor. Yeah, that was a good time. Brian Offit, I don't know if he'll be there this weekend, but Brian Offit was our contact there, and Brian was doing work with guys that were downrange before anybody knew what Under Armour was doing to support the military. Like they were developing fire retardant heat gear because guys were getting blown up, and their Under Armour polyester was like melting into their skin. And so like they had PhDs and scientists that they were working with. You know, Brian's making all these trips because he was running the tactical division there.
That's right, I remember him.
Yeah, and then we get connected, and he's now working for Q Collar.
Okay.
And he went right back to the old special ops community.
Yep.
And they've got a lot of the guys, Navy SEALs, and I think, and you know, your brothers in the special forces that are wearing the Q collar as a preventative, you know, device for things like concussions and brain injuries. So
I could see that. Yeah. I know that. I know that they're sponsoring the PLL.
Yeah.
That they're huge with the PLL.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see Q collars in other sports, like in college football. You're seeing kids wearing Q collars, and in fact, that Green Beret Foundation, Navy SEAL Foundation, we all had to like take measurements or ask for a size for they're donating Q collars to us.
That's awesome.
Yeah. The lacrosse world runs so parallel to the military, like the DoD, and especially I feel like in special operations as well. You remember the Loonies?
Oh yeah.
I mean, I played versus all three of them. Steve, Brendan, I forget the third one. Billy. And then in 2010, when I think it was Brendan that died, we were in the same SOTF, like in the same task force.
Yeah.
He was there. And it's such a, we talk about, I've said it before, that the special operations community, or the lacrosse community, is probably even more is closer than the special operations community, like have 6 degrees of separation.
Oh yeah.
You know, like, oh, do you know this guy? Do you know that guy? And it's within like 2 people. You're like, oh yeah, I know him. Like Josh Sims, for example, right? Yeah.
It really is crazy. And I was blessed at my time at WWP to bump into a lot of these folks. In a kind of a strange twist of fate, I was at a board meeting on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and we got done early, and we had a flight out of BWI. So I'm literally on the bridge, and I called Richie Meade, who had coached me at Army and was now the head coach at Navy. And I said, hey, Coach, I've got a handful of people with me. We're going to stop in Annapolis. I was wondering if I could come watch practice. He's like, yeah, Adam, I'll see you. I'll be all right, great. I'll be there in about an hour. Go to Annapolis, park the car. The girls go downtown. I walk onto the yard, and I walk up, and Coach Meade's on a phone. And that's not Coach Meade. Like, he's not a cell phone during practice guy. So I waited, and I'm kind of watching the guys, and he comes like walking around the fence, and I could see he was tearing up. And I was like, Coach, you okay? He goes, Adam, today is a very bad day. I said, what happened? And I'm thinking somebody got, an honor board or, a drinking slug, somebody's getting kicked out. And he goes, I just got word that Brendan Looney was killed in a helicopter accident. And one of his Navy lacrosse teammates
was on that bird.
Was there with him. And,
my classmate, Jeff Costa, played high school lacrosse with that kid who's a SEAL also, which I can't remember his name right now.
Yeah, I know his name. I don't know if we should say it.
He may still be active.
And so that was the beginning of my introduction to the Looney family.
Yeah.
So I got to know them, and then another.
I think that bridge that you were standing on is actually named after him now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, and this is another strange twist of fate. My daughter Madeline, the one who's married to a Navy pilot, she works for the Travis Manion Foundation. One of the VPs at the Travis Manion Foundation is Brendan's widow, Amy Looney. And so we've gotten to know the Manions and that whole, the Brothers Forever book. They were, roommates at the academy. Travis was a wrestler. And again, it was a humbling experience for me all those years to just be around families that had, just given so much. And so again, I was very lucky. I got to know Brendan and their parents and his sisters, and then again the Manions and Ryan and she's got a kid right now who's a plebe at the Naval Academy, and so the cycle continues.
Where do you think this sense of like duty and service, where it was kind of like a common theme with everything that you've been doing through the years, especially at Warrior Project and with your current business that you're running, where does that sense of duty stem from? Is it lacrosse? Is it West Point?
I'd like to give you the romantic answer and say that it was something that was instilled in me from a young age, or that I've always been inspired to serve. But the truth of the matter was, my father was a sergeant major in the Army. My grandfather was a private in the Army, fought in World War II under Patton. He was in North Africa and Sicily. My other grandfather fought in World War II. So we've got a long family history in the military. But I went to West Point because I wanted to be a Division I lacrosse player, and we were broke. So, for me, it was the best of both worlds. And again, there was a connection to the military. And then truth be told, Ben, I think I was a pretty shitty leader in my 20s. I don't think I was a great young officer. I don't think I was inspired to lead, or I was inspired by duty, honor, country. Again, different time. Peacetime Army is a difficult army to serve in. And then even as a young guy managing when I was in the music business, I think it was really all about me. And then at 35 years old, I was fired from a job that I had numerical success at. I was really good on paper at what I did. And I was fired, and I said, why? And they said, you're not a cultural fit. And I had no idea exactly what that meant. And then I stumbled into the Wounded Warrior Project. And for me, that was the greatest leadership development experience that I've ever had outside of Army lacrosse. I used to say that I went to work in a laboratory every day, because it's not only that we were trying to serve men and women who damn sure deserved it, but we were trying to build a team that was about a cause greater than self. We used to say, if you're a cultural fit here, you're mission driven, you're guided by our core values, and you're a pleasure to work with. And a pleasure to work with doesn't mean you're a yes man or a yes woman. It means you're the best in the world at what you do, or you're given everything you can to be the best in the world at what you do. And so that, for me, that 8.5-year period was really the time where the light bulb went off. And it was so easy. It was almost selfish. Like, you go to work, and I'm literally there to serve guys who are banged up, blown up, and shot up. Like, that's who we serve. Like, if you can't find inspiration, like we'd have people that would get in these little pissant fights about something stupid, and I'm like, remember why we're here?
Yeah.
And so it was easy. You could literally look around, and you'd see that cause greater than self. And then it's just kind of snowballed from there. Being a coach, I wasn't a good coach when I first started. Very much a drill sergeant, rah, yell and scream.
Where did you start coaching?
So I first started coaching in Kansas when I was in the first ID. I helped out a little bit at the Kansas State club team. Then we moved to California, was at UC Irvine and Chapman University, 2 separate times. Then took 10 years, and I didn't do anything. I was like almost completely away from the game of lacrosse. And then I was having dinner with a couple of buddies complaining about not coaching. And they're like, well, get off your ass and go find a team to coach. And I did. And that was 2007. And somebody gave me a book. It's the title of the book is Season of Life. It's by a guy named Jeffrey Marks, about a guy named Joe Ehrman. And Joe went to Syracuse, played football and lacrosse, played in the NFL, was an all-pro, and basically redefined what it meant to be a man. And then I read that book, and it completely changed my life. And that's when I really started to, do this whole thing about it's bigger than me. It's not about me. I'm not the center of the universe. And I've been able to find different opportunities to just kind of serve. And I try to stay in the background. Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not, but it's not for me about any sort of recognition. It's just about making a difference in the lives of, at least one person, hopefully.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's important.
Yeah.
So in 2007, where did you start coaching again? Was that in high school?
Yeah, Nice High School. So everybody knows Nice from Tim Tebow.
Okay.
Yeah, Tebow graduated, I think, in 2005. I got to Nice in 2007.
So you were so close to recruiting him as a midfielder.
Yeah.
Our face-off guy.
You imagine that guy? Yeah, Nice was great. Guy that Jack Francis played at Maryland. Mm-hmm. I called him one day and said, "Hey, I'm looking at getting into coaching." He said, "Did you play in college?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Where'd you play?" I said, "Army." He goes, "Can you be here tomorrow?" And so I did. I coached at Nice for 3 years. Did a short, 6 or 8 months at JU. Things got busy at home. Went back to Ponte Vedra High School. Was there for a few years. Went back to JU. Was able to coach, kind of this player development thing at Hopkins for 2 years. And then now I've been back at JU for this will be my 6th season with our staff up there. So, yeah.
Have there been common themes that you've been able to take from your time playing at West Point and then just being around the military that you've been able to infuse into your different teams, both on the field, off the field?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've said, West Point is the preeminent leadership development institution on the planet, and Truxton Lacrosse Center was the laboratory at the institution. For me, I've never experienced that level of leadership development and cohesion and love, for my teammates and coaches. And so what's interesting is I try not to use a lot of military analogies with our civilian kids, our lacrosse, our players at JU or Hopkins or Nice or Ponte Vedra. But the parallels they just exist. And I keep going back to, it's the relationships you have on the team, your willingness to commit to a cause greater than yourself, and then being a man of character, And so that's my message to the kids, not because I was all those things, but because I probably fell short of being all those things when I was a player. And, it's been really amazing for me too, Ben, because we have 60 guys on our roster. The women I work with the women a little bit too, and they have
at Jacksonville now.
At JU, yeah. And the women have 45. And this, 22 guys play on Saturday. So, what do the other 44 guys do? There's no science to this, but, I've come up with this thing I call the rule of thirds. You got 60 guys on your roster, a third are going to start and play. A third may or may not start, or they're not going to start, but they may or may not play. It's going to be based on the injury report, the scouting report, if you're up by 10, down by 10. And then you get the bottom third who may never see a statistical, meaningful minute in their 4-year experience. And so how do you get a guy in that bottom third to actually come to practice every day and give of himself, knowing that he's never going to reap that reward? He's never going to be the guy who's hoisting the trophy or, the All-American selection, right? And that to me goes all the way back to the time that I spent at Mikey and at Truxton, because we had guys on our team that never played. And I'm 31 years out. When we get together, we don't talk about playing time.
Never.
When I was at Chad Allen's brother John's funeral, who died in the line of duty as a Suffolk County Corrections Officer, we weren't talking about how many goals Chad scored. As I've worked with guys that have gone through, my teammates who've gone through divorce or had their parents, die, or, they've gone through bankruptcies or job losses, we don't get together and review the box scores. We talk about our love for one another and just that brotherhood and that bond that we built during that shared misery, of 4 years at West Point. So
you're telling all the good times and the stories, what happened in Truxton.
Yeah.
The tailgates,
yeah.
all the family stories, right?
Yeah.
That's what I feel like makes it such a unique experience going to school at West Point and playing lacrosse at West Point. You're really in a fraternity and you didn't realize that you just pledged a fraternity, right?
Yeah.
To this day, I'm still on a distro with Eric Minio and Larson and a bunch of different guys and still busting balls, and never once are we talking about scores, but it's just telling stories, right?
Yeah, it's Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean, but let me also, because whoever's listening to this, winning matters.
Of course.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, we wanted to beat Navy, and
Yeah.
I still sign off a lot of my stuff with beat Navy.
Yes.
And it's not to insult them; they do the same thing to us,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's something that's just in your blood now, and winning matters.
Yeah.
But winning isn't the definition of being successful as a man.
Yeah.
You know, and again, there are countless guys that I've played with and coached that never played a meaningful minute of lacrosse who are, and I won't name them because I don't want to put them out, you know, make it awkward. But we just had a kid graduate from JU who literally never played. I call them meaningful minutes.
Yeah.
They're all meaningful, but never played a statistical minute. He's the greatest leader we've had there in my 12 years involved with the program, and never played. You know, we will talk about that kid now for the next however many years because he was the weight room guy. He was the student of the year in the Davis College of Business. He was the guy who kept guys out of trouble on the weekends at the beach. You know, he was the rah-rah guy in practice. He was the scout team guy. Like, you know, and you look at a guy like that and you're like, yeah, he never got the glory, but we'll talk about him, you know, forever. You know, so.
That's the magic. That right there, I think, is the magic recipe, the one key that you have to turn, the one button that you have to push on to create a championship team.
Yeah. Is
that dynamic where, like you said, the thirds, everyone realizes that they're part of an organization that is bigger than just, it's not the name on the back, it's the name on the front.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I've seen that so many times in the athletic world, on special forces teams. You have good ODAs that are close and like it's a brotherhood and you love being on it, and then maybe across the hall you see an ODA where dudes are actually hanging out in your team room because they don't want to go over there because it just sucks.
Yeah.
And the leadership has created this dynamic. And then even in the business world, I've been with two companies. The first one, a lot of great lessons learned, but the way that the leadership had set up that dynamic, it sucked. That it just walking into the building, it drained you. Putting on that shirt, like I at times I was like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Compared to where I am now, where I've been able to be part of that executive and leadership team to establish and lay the foundation of that dynamic. That you work here, but we're all here. You need help? Let's do this together, right? Like we're all in this together, and that team dynamic. I've always been secretly hoping that like Manchester United will call me one time and be like, hey, we know that you know how to make a team. Come help us make this team.
Yeah. There you go. You should call them.
Yeah,
They'll
exactly.
take your call.
I should just blank resume people, everyone in the Premier League or in Europe right now because I've become such a soccer fan. But speaking of those same lines, my son, who we've talked about, is huge into soccer. I played soccer in high school just because it wasn't lacrosse season yet.
Yeah.
And he's taken off with it and loves it. And I've just being a supporter of him, and I've fallen in love with the game as well, and I find it so interesting, the on-field, the off-field, and a huge fan of the game now. He just made a new team. It's one of the bigger teams here in Boca. They're like number 5 in the state of Florida, in the top 10 in the U.S. They just got told, we just had a coach's parents meeting, that they're invited to like the junior national showcase or something like that, because now they're one of the top U14 teams in the United States, right? So I'm like, wow. And he said, the coach was talking about it, that they normally have 18 kids on the roster because only 18 kids can dress, but this year they took 20. My son being either 19 or 20, one of the add-ons, right? And I think that he addressed it to the parents because maybe some of the parents were like, well, why would you do that? And I agree with his reasoning. Whether my son dresses or not, number one, kids get injured. It's a long season.
Yeah.
You need to rotate players through. More importantly, I think it builds character at a young age of understanding that there's a mental aspect to sports. You're there to support the team, right?
Yeah.
There's 20 kids that need to be at practice to make the 18 the best come game day.
Yeah.
And also, it's a fact of life. You have to compete. Things aren't just handed to you.
Yeah.
It's what they say about the Green Beret. It's always earned, never given.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to earn your spot. And like I explained to him, I said, listen, man, as you continue to progress through your soccer career, and hopefully one day you make it pro, God willing, your 18 people can dress. there'll be like 30 on the roster.
Yeah.
That's how this works.
Yeah.
And I'm actually happy that at 13 years old, he's having to come to terms and understand that this is a life lesson. Has a positive mental attitude about it now. Where all right, it's a Monday, but it's a day that ends with it's another day that ends with Y, with an opportunity for you to go out there, show the coach, give it your all, and you're a coach. You notice things like that, right?
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Team Harrow Podcast with Adam Silva. Make sure to join us next week for part 2, where we continue our conversation about impactful leadership. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with others who need to hear these inspiring stories. See you next time.